Hard Hat Riot revisits the explosive 1970 clash between anti-war student protesters and construction workers in New York City. It was a cultural event that reshaped the American political landscape. It really is, and I remember it, but I'm sorry to betray my how old I am, but I remember when it happened. But this is so much more in depth, and to explain not only what happened, the dynamics of that particular so-called Hard Hat Riot, but truly how it did affect the national political dynamic as well. Terrific documentary film. We're joined today by the director Marc Levin, as well as the author of the book, The Hard Hat Riot, and co-producer David Paul Kuhn. To both of you, welcome to the program. This is an in-depth, I call it comprehensive look at this event in American history. Marc, I'll start with you in terms of, did you read the book? Did you know David? How did sort of you begin this journey?
I was given the book by the two executive producers, Mika Beardsley and Carrie Woods, and they said, "Hey, you got to take a look at this. This could make a great documentary." As we spoke earlier, I knew what Hard Hat Riot was. I was here in New York City, college dropout that was working with the Maisels on Gimme Shelter as an apprentice editor, and in the editing room up at 1697 Broadway, I was listening to Wynn's radio because the Knicks were playing that night, and I wanted to know if Will Reed was going to play in Game 7. And all of a sudden, this news break of a disturbance down on Wall Street and construction workers coming down and beating up college students. So I was, familiar, but then when I picked the book up and saw, like you were just stating, the comprehensive kind of contextualization of where it came from, and kind of what its profound effects were. And at the time I was reading about it, there was one op-ed piece and punditry about what happened to the working class? How did the white working class turn from the Democrats to the Republicans? All these articles. And I read David's book and I was like, oh my goodness, this explains it. All the seeds are here in this moment. So that's, I got excited and it said, yeah, I'm very interested. And Mika and Carrie introduced me to David.
David, in terms of your interest in this story, where did that begin and how did it become the book that this film is based on, The Hard Hat Riot?
When Donald Trump became a contender in 2016, I knew I wanted to write another book, but I didn't want it to be an ideas book. I wanted to have narrative and be a lesson of history. And I knew instantly what that lesson had to be, that it was this moment, this riot, this week of 1970, that was the microcosm of the class divide that now defines American politics. And of course, the deeper polarization along cultural lines. And I also knew that there were legal cases over the riots. So I had great hope that there would be records saved because of the rules of discovery. Long story short, once I started to get those records, I was just ecstatic because I knew that, I had a story, and, later I would discover this film footage that we show for the first time in our film. And, that brought home, I already knew this event was cinematic, but once I knew I actually had visuals, I always had it in the back of my mind that this story could be cinema. And I'm just happy through serendipity I met Marc and we made it happen.
That's such a great point in terms of the archival footage, but also the record, but also finding the people who are now 50 some years later from this event to participate. I thought you did a wonderful job. Both of you did a wonderful job of bringing in people who were there and who were people that made things happen in a certain one particular way or another in the film. My goodness, that must have been, you felt like you, because what I see, you hit gold with so many of the people that are in the film.
Obviously, David had identified quite a number of characters in his book, so that was the starting place, reaching out to some of those. But I'd say the two other factors were we met Daphne Pinkerson, producer, and I met with the building trades, the union that represents all the construction workers in New York City and New York State, actually. Through a series of conversations, we got them aboard. And they became excited about the project and supportive so that they could tell their membership, we trust this team. They were aware of David's book. they turned us on to some of the key characters who ended up, first person, who were participants in the Hard Hat Riot. And then on the other side, you had this film that this collective at NYU had done when Martin Scorsese was like a teaching assistant there. And we were able to get Marty's permission. Thank you, Marty, to use some of that footage. He just said we had to get the okay of anybody who talked. That was Harvey Keitel, Jay Cox, and thank them. And Harry Bowles was the cameraman that was part of that collective, who was there on the day with an Arriflex 16 millimeter camera. Unfortunately, he got beaten up. The camera was destroyed. The film was destroyed. And Harry, who worked for NBC for many years, ended up in Nicaragua, married to a Nicaraguan woman. But we were able to interview him. And I think he added a great element also to the film.
Well, let's dive into this incredibly fraught and important part of American history. Again, I have the advantage and disadvantage of having lived through all this. I think, David, your astute observation, and at the time, I think people kind of knew what was happening, but I don't think they really quite understood the long-term ramifications of this connection, particularly of the Republican Party, to working class people in not only in New York City, but across the country. The sort of silent majority, as Nixon later on coined it. Was that Colson who came up with that? I don't remember. Was that Charles Colson who came up with
the phrase silent majority? It probably, and it was Pat Buchanan.
Pat Buchanan.
Pat
Yeah, I think you're
Buchanan
right.
also says probably. It comes from, I mean, I interviewed him several times. So we best understanding that term comes from Buchanan.
Okay, so let's talk about this moment in American history, because a lot of people look at 68, and it's referred to in the film as this sort of seminal year in American history, kind of a turning point in a lot of different ways. And if I were to describe 1968 as an earthquake, I would describe 1970 as an aftershock. Is that a fair way to put it, David?
It's an interesting way to put it. I mean, they're almost in the same way that, I use the metaphor of an earthquake early in my book, and right, because that's what fault lines are, right? We don't notice fault lines until the quake. They slowly come with us over time, millimeters, year by year, and then it explodes. I would say there are different earthquakes related to this similar fault lines. And what happens in 1970, the anti-war movement radicalizes like never before. Nixon is now president. When Chicago happened in 68, Nixon was not yet president. So a lot had changed by then. And I think that for the left of that time, they felt much more alienated and powerless, which helped feed the radicalization because, at that point, Nixon had been president, the war had gone on. And then, of course, Kent State happens.
This is a great documentary film, and I would also happen to have seen Drop Dead City earlier this year. These are a great window into the world of New York City during this period of time. I think the two of them together are a brilliant way to look at New York and how it shaped American politics and American history in so many different ways. This is wonderful. It is coming out on American Experience on September 30th on PBS. Be looking for it, pbs.org. Go to your PBS app. Just an absolutely immersive look into a very, very important event, but also this period of time in American history. So to both of you, Marc Levin, as well as David Paul Kuhn, thank you so very much for your time and for your work here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.